Welcome, everyone, to this inaugural episode of WCAT Radio and TV Presents. I'm your host, Jennifer Thomas, and I am so excited to be here with you today. I have the honor and privilege to interview the one and only Dr. Peter Kreeft to discuss his latest book, The Mystery of Joy. For those who haven't been introduced to Dr. Kreeft before, he is a professor of philosophy at Boston College, is one of the most respected and prolific Christian authors of our time. His books cover a vast array of topics in spirituality, theology, and philosophy. They include Doors in the Walls of the World, The Greatest Philosopher Who Ever Lived, How to Be Holy, Because God is Real, You Can Understand the Bible, and Summa of the Summa. Dr. Kreeft, it is truly an honor to meet you today.
It isn't, but thank you for saying so anyway.
It isn't? Oh my gosh, I think it is. So I have to be honest with you. I read your introduction to The Mystery of Joy, and I loved your honesty in it. I absolutely love the fact that, you're not sugarcoating anything. And so in the spirit of honesty, I thought you should know that my degree is in psychology. So I do tend to look at things from a bit of a different perspective than philosophical, but I truly enjoyed reading your book. So for those who don't know, I just wanted to ask, what was it that prompted you to write the book in the first place, The Mystery of Joy?
God has given me, in my old age, as he usually does, a lot of sufferings and humiliations, and I realized that joy was compatible with them, not incompatible with them, because it is not essentially a feeling, just as love is not essentially a feeling. Meanwhile, you may psychoanalyze me as I argue with you, so this should be an interesting conversation.
You know what? I don't psychoanalyze unless I'm asked, and technically I am not certified to do that. So no worries on that end.
Well, I'm not certified to be a philosopher either, so I'm an imitation of a philosopher. There are no such things as philosophical certification.
There you go. And see, that's the difference. So I think this is going to be great. So I love the fact that you're trying to come at it from a different perspective where it's not a feeling. And one of the things that I read in the book was that we lack peace as well as joy. And so that is such an interesting concept. Just thinking about it in terms of, if we don't have peace, then is it possible to have joy? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think peace and spiritual warfare are compatible, just as joy and suffering are compatible. In purgatory, for instance, the saints, especially Saint Catherine of Genoa, who had the most revelations about purgatory, says that together with pains greater than any on earth, there are joys greater than any on earth. Because you have the guarantee and hope of heaven, and you're perfectly doing God's will. You can't sin in purgatory. And if that's what you want most, you get that, and getting what you most want is the deepest joy, whether you feel it or not.
That is so
I use the analogy of investing money in a bank. You bank on it, you trust the trust company, but you don't necessarily have feelings about it. But you put all your eggs in one basket, and that basket is Christ. My favorite prayer in the whole world is the simplest one I've ever heard from St. Faustina. Jesus, I trust in you.
I love that. And there's actually a litany. There's the Litany of Trust that the Sisters of Life wrote. They're an organization, and I actually have that litany and have actually been praying it recently. So it's so ironic because the whole concept of it is Jesus, I trust in you. And just that idea of repeating that over and over again. And one of the other things that I read, in terms of like when you were writing about the composition of the book, is that everything good begins with God, and the lack of everything good begins with the lack of God. If that is not true, then either there is no God or God is only a God, like Zeus.
Yeah.
I just love the idea that, you introduce everything from a both and perspective, that both things can coexist. And ironically, that is something that, comes out in the world of psychology. Is sometimes we are faced with these life challenges, with these sufferings, and we think, oh, why is this happening to me? But, or how could this person have hurt me and still love me? They can hurt you and still love you. So that whole concept of both and, I think you just beautifully describe in your book.
Well, from a psychological point of view, the most certain and familiar instance of that is our attitude towards ourselves.
Absolutely.
We don't we know that we are not perfect saints, that we are stupid and make all sorts of mistakes, uh, and we still love ourselves. And we can also fight the good fight on the right side. We're certain we're on the right side, and yet it's a fight, and it's a drama, and we're not at peace yet because we're still in the middle of the war, but we are at peace because we're on the right side and guaranteed victory. One of my favorite images in the Bible is towards the end of the book of Revelation. Uh, in symbolic language, there's a lamb and a dragon who are fighting. And the dragon is Satan, and the lamb, of course, is Christ. And they're fighting for the human race. And it looks as if that poor lamb is not going to stand a chance against the big fire-breathing dragon. It's exactly the opposite. The dragon doesn't stand a chance against the lamb because the lamb has a secret weapon, his own blood.
Right. That is, ugh. Now I have that picture in my head. So thank you for giving us that beautiful imagery. And I love it. Okay, so I do want to also say that I am a big fan of definitions, of looking up definitions of words to see the different meanings. And so I did actually look up on Merriam-Webster to see what they say about joy, because, in your book, you're talking about it in terms of it being a mystery. And so when I looked up the definition of joy, these were the three primary definitions that it gave. So the first says it's, ironically, a feeling of great happiness or pleasure, the expression or exhibition of such emotion, a state of great happiness, a source or cause of delight. So in your book, you describe the word joy in so many different ways. And I'm wondering, how, in your own words, how would you describe joy? Because I know you said that it's not a feeling. But how would
feelings
you?
accompany it. There are feelings of joy, just as there are feelings of love, and feeling has a role even in conscience. But those three things, and faith and hope and charity, are all fundamentally acts of will, although feelings are important and they can help or hinder that act.
Mhm.
No, I would say that joy is best defined by analogy. Joy is to happiness what happiness is to pleasure. We
Mm.
desire all three of them, but pleasure is superficial and doesn't go deep into ourselves or our lives, and it's always temporary. Happiness is much more interior and much more lasting and much more peaceful, but it's not perfect because you can be bored by happiness. Joy is the next stage beyond happiness. It's a surprise. It's new. It never gets boring. One
Mm.
of the things that, as a student of literature as well as philosophy, that fascinates me about the figure of Jesus in the Gospels is that, unlike every other human being who ever lived, Jesus never bored anybody. He surprises everybody all the time. He never fits into our boxes. He's always more than we expect. And in the New Testament, Jesus is not just the one who happens to give us joy. Jesus is our joy. It's our ontological residence in him. It's our possession of him and his spirit that constitutes our joy.
I just love I love how you stated that. And like Jesus is joy. And how many people he reached in his ministry who he changed their lives. I mean, he brought joy into their lives. And I also love the fact that, you moved on, like you say, happiness is almost like a precursor to joy. And because I've always heard it as happiness is like a temporary state. Whereas if you have joy, joy kind of like radiates from you, depending on,
Yeah.
of course, the situation that you're in. And I also, read in your book that you wrote, joy's secret, however, is that it cannot be reached or found, but only given. So could you explain that a little bit more?
We can do things to make ourselves fertile soil, but God plants the seed. Joy is a gift of the Holy Spirit. It comes from heaven. And not everybody has it. And the main criteria for having it is accepting it, wanting it. It's a part of the whole package deal. Faith, hope, charity, joy, peace, salvation. These are all gifts of God. And a gift not only has to be freely given, it has to be freely received. And since we have free will, we can always, for various motives, refuse to receive those gifts.
Absolutely. And our free will is sometimes what prevents us from experiencing joy.
Yeah, it's also the thing that allows for joy as it allows for love. So that's the most dangerous thing God ever did, give us free will, knowing how badly we would misuse it and nevertheless taking care of that.
Wow.
We can trust him even with free will. We can't trust ourselves with free will. It's too big a power, but we can trust him with it. So if we surrender to him, that's the most important act of free will we can make.
So what do you think the connection is then between surrender and joy?
Well, peace is one of the fruits of joy. And in Hebrew, the word shalom means both surrender and peace. And in Arabic, the word Islam also has those two meanings.
Mm.
T.S. Eliot said that Dante's line in Divine Comedy is the profoundest line ever uttered in human literature outside the Bible. And it has simply four words: his will, our peace. In other words, in our free choice to surrender to his will, we constitute our deepest peace. Even though his will is for us to go through all sorts of humiliations and sufferings. But that's for out of his love and for our good. We need humility, so we need to be humiliated. We need sufferings because otherwise we're going to be selfish, spoiled little brats.
You are so right about that. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of doing like a word of the year. But it's in essence, it's where you kind of discern something that God wants you to kind of work on or focus on. And just in these few minutes that we've been recording, you've used, I believe, four of my words from previous years. So I just love how God works and makes these beautiful connections between people. You also wrote that true joy is God himself who, giving himself, takes us outside ourselves across valleys of loss and mountains of triumph. So, without giving too much away from the book, what are some of your own personal valleys of loss and mountains of triumph that you're willing to share, that you feel comfortable sharing?
They're those that all flesh is heir to. Life is a roller coaster. One thing that is guaranteed is that after the roller coaster goes up and you have a peak experience, it's not going to last, and you're going to get tested, and you're going to be plunged back into the valley of conflict. And another thing that's guaranteed is that once you're in that valley of conflict, if you're in God's will, he will deliver you from it, and he'll bring you back up the mountain. And if life
Mm-hmm.
were not like that, if it weren't a weird roller coaster and up and down, if it were a flat line, it would be dead. Things that are dead have no ups and downs. They're flat. Things that are alive go way up and way down. People think that there's a choice between the heights and the depths. There's not. You live either vertically or horizontally. If you live at the heights, you'll also live at the depths. If you live in love, if you give your heart away, your heart is guaranteed to be broken because everything we can love in this world is going to go away and die. So that deepest joy that comes from loving and that deepest sorrow that comes from disappointed love necessarily go together. I think it was Henry Nouwen who uttered the very profound line, only the heart that has been broken can be a complete heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me, there's this Japanese concept of kintsugi, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's where there's like a pot that is broken, um, and it's put together, but when it's put together, it's stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the other thing that they do is where they glued it back together, they highlight it in gold. And that's so that you can see all of the different places where the brokenness occurred, but it is stronger. And this also reminds me so much of, Jesus's death. So,
And his wounds in the
yes,
resurrection body, they're badges of
yes.
honor now. They're made of gold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I, I just, and through his death and then the resurrection, there's always the resurrection. And it's that resurrection is where, we find our joy. Like our true ultimate joy is not to be found here on earth. It's meant to be found in heaven.
Well, even on earth, the joy we get from deliverance from sorrow is greater than the joy that we get by avoiding sorrow,
Absolutely.
which is one of
And
the reasons God gives us sorrow, so that we get greater joy in the end.
yeah, I think it's important that as humans, we are able to embrace sorrow whenever it comes. We might do it kicking and screaming at
Yep.
first,
Yep.
but if we don't go through that valley, then we're not going to come out on the other side. And, the whole idea of our path to sainthood, I mean, if you look at, there's so many saints who, I mean, they suffered greatly. There were so many martyrs who they suffered, and they said that they would rather, you know, they would rather die knowing that they stood up for their faith
Mm-hmm.
than live denying God. And I know that you mentioned some of the saints in your book. Would you care to share a little bit about that?
I met Mother Teresa once, just very briefly.
You
She
did?
came
Oh
to our
my
local church
goodness.
and shook hands with her. And she said, God bless you. And I was the only person in the world at that point, for her at that time. I knew. I've never seen such concentrated attention in a human being. But the thing that has reference to joy here is her face was full of wrinkles and obviously full of suffering. But her eyes were so twinkly and so happy that you saw the suffering and the happiness in that same person at the same time. I've never
Mm.
seen such marks of suffering and such happiness, and they were together.
So she was the epitome of that concept of both and, where
Yeah,
she both has suffered and yet she still
she
had
totally
joy.
gave her heart and her life away to Christ and to her neighbor, and that involved plunging into the deepest of suffering and into the deepest of joy, both.
Mm, that, wow. Okay, so here's a question. Because you met her before she passed away, but now she's a saint. So are you are you like a second class or third class relic because you encountered her?
No, that doesn't count, does it?
It doesn't count.
Uh,
Okay. I just thought I would ask because I've been on a journey of researching more about relics and learning about relics.
Almost
So
everybody who meets Mother Teresa says the same thing, namely that I knew that I was the only person in her world and in her mind at that moment. The rest of the world dropped away. It was just me and her alone. And she gave me 100% of her attention. Well, that's what
wow,
God does all the time to each of us.
he does.
Somebody, I think it was Ronald Knox, said that if you were the only person God ever created, he would have done all the things for you that he did for everybody. He would have gone through all the trouble, the incarnation, the crucifixion, everything. And then he said, in fact, that's who he did it for, each individual, every single one.
And that's something that I think for us as human beings is a hard concept to grasp, that God is not only present for each of us as individuals, but he's present for all of us at the same time. And I
Yes.
think that's a very hard concept, because I know for me, I've got 3 kids, and when one of them wants my attention,
Mm-hmm.
inevitably the others want my attention too. And sometimes it feels like you have to ignore the other while giving the attention to the one. And I guess it's just one of those mysteries that we will never truly be able to fully grasp, at least here on earth, that it is possible for God to see each and every one of us as individuals, and to look at us and
And not just as equal individuals, but as unique individuals. I remember
yes.
once, every once in a while, I realize that somebody asked me a question that I can't possibly answer. So I either say nothing or let the Holy Spirit answer. And this was definitely a Holy Spirit answer. I have 4 kids, and they're within 6 years of each other. And once, when I was talking to all 6 of them, one of them said, "Dad, am I your favorite?" And I said, "Yes, John, you are. And so are you, Jenny. And so are you, Catherine. And so are you, Elizabeth." And they accepted that answer.
Wow. That is that's amazing, because most kids would be like, who's really your favorite? And but that's I mean, that's how God intends it to be. So I
Yeah.
love the idea of thinking of it in terms of we are each God's favorite. And so bringing it back to your book, why do you think joy is such a mystery? Because I mean, the title of the book is The Mystery of Joy. So what is it about joy that makes it such a huge mystery?
Well, one of the things is that in distinction from happiness, it's always surprising. Happiness is a satisfaction of deep desire. And that's not surprising. You already have it in your mind as desired, and then you get it. But there's something new in joy. It doesn't get boring. Happiness can get boring, which is
Hmm.
probably why we love horror movies, vicarious suffering. But uh, I remember I had a crisis of faith once when I was a teenager. I thought heaven was like a church service, and I was bored with church services, and I didn't want to be bored forever. And then I realized that heaven couldn't possibly be boring because God's always got surprises for us. And I was also helped by the idea in the Book of Revelation that there are no temples in heaven because God's there. The temple is simply an icon for God, and when the real God is there, you don't need the icon anymore. And God is infinite, so for an infinite time.
One of the next questions that I have for you, and first of all, I love how you wrote the book, like the actual structure of the book, where it's all of these short chapters, because I feel like that makes it easy to read, and the fact that you even tell the readers in the beginning of the book, like it's not necessarily something that you have to read from beginning to end. You can just kind of flip through to one chapter or another and decide what exactly it is that you want to what is moving you, where the Holy Spirit is taking you.
It's like
So,
life that way. It's
yes,
like the organization of the Psalms. They're random, like life.
yes, exactly. And sometimes that randomness is what we need
Yes,
because if we try to predict everything, God's going to throw something in our way. And he's going I mean,
inevitably.
inevitably, absolutely. So one
I
of the
love the saying, if you want to give God a good laugh, tell him your plans.
yes, that is so true. And I'm a planner. So that is so difficult for me whenever I have a plan and I think I know how everything is going to play out and God's like, "Nope. This is not my will, so we're going to change it up."
My favorite sermon of all time is the one that God preached to St. Catherine. He said, there's only two things you need to know. Number one, I'm God. Number two, you're not.
I mean, that's pretty much like a mic drop moment right there. Like God just mic dropped her. One of the chapters that I found really interesting was chapter 54, and the title of it is it selfish to seek our own joy?
Hmm.
So, you know, what made you write that chapter in particular, and why did you feel like it was important for people to understand whether or not it's selfish to be seeking our own joy?
I think that was my reflection on St. Thomas Aquinas' statement, no man can live without joy.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it is necessary, if deprived of true joy, that he become addicted to false joys. We're
Yep.
made for joy. So it is not wrong to seek our own joy. It's not, that's God's will for us. But why do we seek our own joy? Do we seek our own joy in order to control it, in order to play God, or in order to receive it gratefully and humbly and thankfully from God? There's two different attitudes in seeking our own joy. But it's certainly not wrong to do so. We're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
we're supposed to love ourselves as our neighbor.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, well, not sometimes, oftentimes it is easier said than done.
Yes.
Um, and that is,
In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it's not just easier said than done. We have in us a contrary instinct, which is not only stupid and bad, it's utterly irrational and it's insane because we know that the secret of joy is self-forgetful love and following God's will. And God is love, so he wants us to be like him. And we know from past experience that every time we say to God, your will be done, we get joy. And every time we say to God, no, my will be done, we get misery. So the next time we have a moral choice, it's God says, all right, in this hand is the secret of joy. My will be done. Do you want my right hand? Or in my left hand is the secret of all misery. Your will be done. Which will you do? And what's our reaction? Well, let's see, God. Left hand is tempting. Let me try it. Maybe it'll work this time. We're nuts.
because we think we're in control and we want to be in control,
Yes.
especially when it comes to our own happiness. And um, I think the other piece of that isn't just that reciting of thy will be done. It's actually allowing him
Yes.
to enter into us and say, whatever your will is, God, that's
Yes.
what I want to do. And that goes
Yeah.
back to that element of surrender
And
and
trust. Yes.
and that Jesus, I trust in you. But
Yep.
you can't just say it, you have to
Yep.
believe it. And that's where
Yep.
there's that distinction, I think, between, surface level and that deep sense of love that God has for us and knowing that he wants what's best for us and also
I,
trusting that he knows what's best for us.
I know that ideally our motive for that has to be faith and hope and charity. But I find in my experience that the fallback on a purely human and purely rational motive also sometimes works because uh, what's the alternative to trusting him? Trusting nobody. If you can't trust him, you can't trust anybody. And if you can't trust anybody, your whole life falls apart. What else is there? Nothing.
Yeah.
When in John 6, Jesus scandalized many of his disciples by teaching his real presence in the Eucharist, most of them went away. They couldn't take it. And he said to the apostles who hung around, "Will you go away too?" And Peter said, "Where will we go? You're the one who has the words of eternal life. What else is there? Nothing."
Mm. You're making me think. Which I guess is good because you're a philosopher, so you're making this student of psychology think a little bit more. So one of your other chapters that I really enjoyed is how can it was 64, and it's how can we have joy in heaven if someone we love is in hell? And that's something that I think a lot of us who have loved ones who have passed away and we're not sure where they've gone. Ideally, if they haven't gone straight to heaven, then they're in purgatory. But you know, if someone we love is in hell, how is it
Um,
possible to still have joy? So, can you maybe go into that a little bit for us?
well, the first and most important thing is to admit that we don't have a clear answer to that question because we're not God. We don't see things from his point of view. So we can't imagine. We're too limited to be able to imagine how, in our present condition, we could possibly be happy if we see someone that we love uh, eternally, hopelessly suffering in hell. And that's right. We shouldn't be able to imagine that. But we can believe that God somehow solves that problem. The ones who choose to go to hell can't blackmail God's joy. Somehow God continues to love them because God can't turn off his love. He is love. And yet that doesn't give to him the power, or rather take away from him the power of joy. Now, how he does it, we don't know, but he does it, and he'll share that with us. You can't say that we'll stop loving in heaven. Heaven isn't less love than earth. And you can't say that your joy is going to be polluted and blackmailed by those in hell. Joy is not polluted or blackmailed in heaven. So somehow or other he does it. That's data. That's divine revelation. How he does it, we can't imagine. We just have to trust him. It's a little bit the dilemma of infallible divine predestination and genuine human free will. Very difficult to get those two together. And we
Mm-hmm.
can't imagine how they're together, but we know they are together because they're both pieces of divine revelation. They're both data. So let's be scientific. Let's accept all the data and see if we can form a hypothesis that can explain them. And usually the hypothesis is partial. Aristotle was half right and half wrong. And then along came Einstein, and then along came quantum physics, and it keeps getting better, but it's never the whole picture.
Right. And
We
we will
just don't have.
never know the whole picture.
Well, maybe in heaven we will, but on earth we won't.
Yeah, we can definitely hope. One of the things that you said in that chapter in particular was you actually quoted from Lord of the Rings. You quoted Gandalf, and it says, "Not all tears are an evil."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I ever thought of tears in that respect before that, they could be evil. And you go on to say that any persons are in hell cannot be a pure joy to anyone who loves them, but perhaps there is a joy in pure heavenly sorrow, a joy that we barely comprehend. For even here joy can be found in sorrow, so that the very sorrow can be joy, although joy itself cannot be sorrow. And then you go on to say, Marian apparitions and statues often weep.
Mhm.
So perhaps in heaven there are good tears, which God wipes away, which is referenced in Revelation 21:4, which is actually one of my favorite scripture verses for a couple of reasons that I'll save for a later time. But just that visual of, our tears are not lost. Our tears actually have
Yeah.
value.
Well, even in this world, we weep not only when we're in very deep sorrow, but also when we're in very deep joy.
Yes, that
That's
that
a
is true.
paradox,
It is a paradox, and
but it's true.
there actually has been some scientific research done on tears, um, showing that tears actually can release toxins out of your body. So whenever we cry, we are releasing toxins,
Hmm.
and which helps get out the bad stuff.
Hmm.
So I love thinking of it in terms of, okay, God gave us the ability to cry, and he also knew that we would need another way to get our emotions out. He knew that we were going to be an emotional
Hmm.
people, and that it gets toxins out. So I just I think that that's beautiful, and I love the idea of thinking of these Marian apparitions, and these statues, because there are so many out there
Yeah.
that all of a sudden you'll see a news article and it'll say, "Oh, we saw this Marian statue weeping," and
One of my favorite verses in the Bible is in John's Gospel when Lazarus dies and Jesus comes to visit Mary and Martha, and they're weeping. And it's the shortest verse in the Bible, only two words. Jesus wept. What does
mm-hmm.
God think about our sorrows? He enters into them. St. Paul tells us, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep.
Mm.
Stoics say, no, don't weep with those who weep. That's what's missing in Stoicism. There's a kind of a high morality in Stoicism, but it's too proud. It's too individualistic. It lacks sympathy. It lacks empathy. There's a very strange verse in one of Paul's letters. Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, making light of its shame. And that's usually interpreted to mean, well, he knew he was going to heaven in the end. But I think uh, even which was before him in Gethsemane and caused intense agony, so he sweated. Uh, that was also a joy because he knew he was going to save those he loved from Satan's grip. And his love was so great that the joy of being able to save those he loved uh, was even greater than the sorrow of the cross.
So, one of the other things that I loved about the book was towards the end of it, you go through a series of different elements that are, the causes of our joy. So, anywhere from Mary, the angels, beauty. Why did you feel like it was important to include those in the book?
Well, they're importantly different than us. Uh, Mary is sinless, we're not. Angels do not have bodies and bodily emotions, we do. Uh, to look at ourselves from radically different points of view, that's very useful. That's why it's great to read great literature. I love Dostoevsky. His characters are all weird, but so are we, and we don't realize it until we identify with them. So there's something in us that aspires to Mary, and there's something in us that aspires to the purity of an angel, although that's not our destiny. Uh, in fact, angels, I think, do not weep. I don't recall any vision of an angel with the angel weeping. And that reminds me of a very strange saying of St. Faustina. She says, if the angels were capable of envy, they would envy us for two things that they do not have. One is the Holy Communion, and the other is sorrow.
Hmm. I love Saint Faustina. She's
She's amazing.
She's uh, a friend of mine uses the term she has a saint posse. So those are the saints who are in her corner, and Faustina is definitely one who there's so much to learn from the saints, and Faustina is definitely like one of the top ones. Dr. Kreeft, I would like to know what you hope readers of this book will gain as a takeaway. So, what are some key takeaways that you hope people get from this book?
I don't write a book with that, first of all, in mind. Uh, I write a book when I think I see something worth seeing and I want to share it with other people. So some people will get out of this book a bunch of questions to explore. Others will get a set of answers that satisfy them. Some will be inspired by one of the points, some will be inspired by another point. So I can't honestly answer the question, what is the one thing I expect all the readers to get out of this book? I'm just sharing my poor brains with you, and you can pick them and eat what you want. It's a cafeteria.
Well, I'm going to throw it back on you then. What did you get out of writing the book?
That's a very good question. I wrote the book because I think God has given me a better understanding of suffering and its relation to joy, a much more mysterious one. And he does that by lifting us up to a somewhat higher perspective where we can accept apparent contradictions and paradoxes. You know, a two-dimensional creature couldn't understand the third dimension. So if we try to express a road disappearing into the distance in 2 dimensions, it'll look to him just like a triangle or a dunce's hat.
Mm-hmm.
And three-dimensional creatures can't understand that two bodies can occupy the same space, but not at the same time because they don't have time. Now we're in 4 dimensions, 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. And God's in eternity, which transcends time. So things that we can't answer in our 4 dimensional thinking, like predestination and freedom, or why in heaven do the blessed not suffer because they know people are in hell. Those kind of questions can't be answered in 4 dimensional thinking, but only in God's eternal thinking. And sometimes he gives us little brief glimpses of that higher dimension. And we realize that, yes, it can be reconciled. This paradox is real, but we can't explain it in the lower world. So the closer we get to God, the closer we'll get, but never totally, to seeing it. You can't do it by the scientific method. You can't do it by computer thinking. Algorithms are worthless. You can't quantify it or put it in scientific formulas. You have to use a deeper part of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But God sometimes gives you little insights that you don't fully understand, but you know, yes, that's got to be the way it is somehow.
And I think that I would relate that most to, wisdom, to the fruit of
Yes.
wisdom. Because when we're able to look at a situation and not only think of it as, okay, this is part of God's will, but then be able to look back on it and see, okay, I see that this is where God's hand was in my life.
Yep.
And being able to just thank God, even if it was for something that you suffered through, for a great suffering.
Yep.
But being able to look back on it and see why you went through the suffering. And
that's what Job did at the end. He didn't he still at the end didn't understand exactly what God was doing, but he saw God face to face, and he said, "Now I know 2 things: I know who I am, and I know who you are."
And that was what God wanted, was for him to know who he was.
Exactly.
Ultimately. Wow. Well, Dr. Kreeft, it has been such a pleasure to do this interview with you today. I'm so grateful for you to join me on this first inaugural episode of this WCAT TV and radio presents The Mystery of Joy with you. What is one last thing that you would like to leave our listeners and viewers with today before we part?
Don't be afraid of mysteries. Explore them. They're God's gift to us.
Don't
demand all the answers.
That's such a challenge.
Life is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a mystery
Right.
to be lived.
Oh, I love that. That's just so beautiful, and I think it deserves to be on a t-shirt. I think we're going to have to put it on a t-shirt at some point. Well, Dr. Kreeft, once again, thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of WCAT Radio and TV Presents. We look forward to bringing more episodes to you that help all of us on our mission of promoting the Catholic spiritual journey through quality Catholic programming. And remember, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight. I'm your host, Jennifer Thomas, and until next time, God bless.